In this video, we will show you how to replace your lower ball joint on this Dodge Ram. This will be located behind your front wheel, attached to the front differential. Let's get into it. Just a quick note on this, whenever you're going to replace a ball joint, you want to make sure that you replace them as a pair. Okay friends, let's get started on our job. The first thing we'll do is safely raise and support the front of the vehicle so the wheel's off the ground. Once you've done that, we'll continue on to removing the center cover and then all 8 of our 24mm lug nuts. Remove your wheel. With the wheel out of the way, the next thing we'll do is continue on to dismounting the ABS wire from this area. Find one little bracket right here. We'll just lift that up and out of there. Now we can come along the flex hose here. There we are. Let's move along to removing our caliper from the area. To do this, you'll find that you have two 12.16mm headed bolts. We'll start with this one up along the top. We're going to loosen this, but leave it in just a couple threads. Quick inspection on that. Now let's carefully grab that caliper. We'll slide it away from the brake rotor. At this point, you can have a look at the brake pads. If it looks like they need to be replaced, now's the perfect time to do it. We'll set this aside. Remove the brake rotor. Quick inspection. Set it aside. Along the outside of the wheel bearing is where you're going to find your axle nut. We'll use some cutters and remove the cotter pin here. Now we can remove our axle nut using a 1 11/16 socket. Behind that, you'll find you have a washer. Remove that as well. Quick inspection on these. We will be reusing them. A little bit of penetrant. We'll let this sit here and do its job, and we can make our way along the back side of the knuckle. Now that we've removed that nut, let's make our way along the back side of the knuckle. What we're going to be looking for on our application is 4 14mm headed mounting bolts that hold the wheel bearing to the knuckle. There's that one. To remove the bearing from the knuckle safely without damaging the bearing, you could put in one of your mounting bolts along the backside here. Continue on with an air chisel with a 1/2-inch drive on the end, and then use the specific socket that you need to go right on the head of that mounting bolt. Once you've done so, you can cause some vibration to essentially break this free without damaging the bearing. Now that this is broken free, we can remove this. Get the backing plate out of there. This should be in much better condition. Now we can set this aside. With the wheel bearing out of the way, let's remove our axle from this area. Just slide it right on through the knuckle. Let's move along to removing the outer tie rod end from the knuckle. On this, you'll use a 21mm socket to remove the nut. Start that back on there a couple threads. We'll continue on with a hammer, and we're going to give this a couple loving bonks, trying to cause vibration to break this free. Be extremely careful not to damage the tie rod while doing so. You can remove this nut. Remove the tie rod end from the knuckle. Let's continue on with an 1.1/8" socket to remove the lower ball joint nut. Give it a quick inspection and then start it back on a couple threads. Now we can start removing the upper ball joint nut. On this one, typically you'll find that you have a locking cotter pin. We'll use some cutters and just get that right out of there. Once we've done that, we can remove the nut. Let's use our cutters and pull this right out of here. We'll use a 15/16 to remove this nut. Once that's off of there, we'll be making sure that our ABS bracket is still reusable, and we can set this mounting nut aside. The next thing we'll have to do is cause some vibration so that we can separate the knuckle from the ball joints. Make sure before you start doing this process, you do have the safety nut on that lower ball joint. This is very important so it doesn't fall down and potentially hurt you. Now that that's nice and loose, let's remove this nut and the knuckle from the vehicle. Now that we have the knuckle out of the way, we can start removing the lower ball joint from the lower aspect of the front differential. Along the top of this, you'll find that you have a snap ring holding this in place. To remove this, we'll be using some snap ring pliers. We want to try to get into each of those two little ears and gently pop this out of place. Be careful because this is under spring tension. There's that. With that clip out of the way, we can start pressing this ball joint out of the control arm. To press it out, we're going to be pressing it down. Now that we have the ball joint broken free, let's continue on with the hammer. We'll give this a couple loving bonks to try to drive it out. If you can't use a hammer, you can also try using an air chisel. There it is, friends. We'll clean and inspect the area. You especially want to make sure that the bottom area where that ball joint will sit is nice and clean. Oh yeah, this looks perfect. Let's use a little bit of anti-seize. Come right inside the hole here. All right, friends, let's get ready for the installation of our brand new lower ball joint. To install this, we'll be coming down along the bottom here and line it up with the corresponding mounting hole. Once you've done that, the next thing you'll want to do is find a cup that fits directly along the lip of the ball joint. We do not want to press up against the stud because you will damage that brand new ball joint. And of course, be aware of the boot. This one fits perfectly, but the stud does drop down a little bit, so I'll just be using another adapter right underneath this area. Now that we have the bottom set up, let's pay attention up along the top area. You remember as we were removing our original ball joint, it stuck up a little bit higher than the differential because we had a snap ring on there. We'll take a flat plate and come right up along the top here. Continue on with the ball joint press. This should just barely fit in here if you're lucky. Now we can tighten this up. Before you continue tightening, make sure that it's as level as possible with the differential. Obviously, the outer portion of the differential tube here is angled, but the inner portion where the ball joint needs to sit will actually be straight up and down. Now that I drove that up here, I want to pay attention along the top. I'm looking to see if I can see the groove where that snap ring sits. If it does not, that means that the ball joint is not completely seated, which is common if you're using a plate like this. Now the next thing I'll do is use a cup that has a hollowed out area for this ball joint to be able to come up just a little bit further. Now I'll pay attention up along top here one more time. I can see the groove for our brand new snap ring to go into. Put this into the snap ring pliers. Slide this into position. We'll just double check all the way around to make sure it is secured properly. Now we can get ready to install our steering knuckle. Let's make sure that we put it around each one of those ball joint studs. We'll just slide it right up. At this point, I'll start on my lower ball joint nut here. Now we can continue on to our ABS bracket and our upper ball joint nut. As far as this ABS bracket, we want to have this area facing towards the rear of the vehicle. Right up in there. Now I'll start my nut on the bottom here. Let's continue on to tightening each of these. Now we can bottom out each of our ball joint nuts. Use 1 1/8 inch down along the bottom here. We'll use a 15/16 for the top nut. Torque the lower ball joint to 110 foot-pounds. Now we can torque the upper ball joint nut to 60 foot-pounds. Once you have that torqued, the next thing you want to do is pay attention to the hole that goes through the ball joint stud and the slots that are on the nut. We're trying to get our cotter pin straight on through there. If for some reason it's not lined up, continue tightening this nut until the very next slot is. Now we can install our cotter pin. Slide that right on through and pin it over so there's no way this nut can loosen up on you while you're driving down the road. Now we can start carefully installing our axle. We'll be sliding this all the way into the differential tube. Let's continue on with a wire brush. We're going to clean up the mounting area where the wheel bearing will sit. Along the inside here, and then you also want to try to get along this area, right where the bearing is going to press up against. Once you fully clean the area, use some anti-seize all along this inboard side here and along this flush edge. Aside from that, we'll also be coating the splined area of our axle. You don't necessarily need to cover the threaded area. At this point, we can continue on by putting on the backing plate, which ours is rotted. I'll be leaving it out. And then, of course, the bearing. Slide this in. You want to make sure you have the ABS sensor up along the top. Slide this right in. Align our mounting bolt holes. There we are. Let's get the ABS wire mounted into this bracket here. Let's continue mounting in the wheel bearing to the steering knuckle. We'll start in all 4 of our mounting bolts. Once they're started in, you can go ahead and snug them up and then torque them to 122 foot-pounds. Do the same over here. All right, now we can prepare to put on our brake rotor. Before you do so, you want to make sure you clean the mating surface on your wheel bearing and on the inside of the rotor. You can use some parts cleaner, maybe even a wire brush. After that, we'll continue on with some anti-seize along the mating surface. Now we can put that rotor on there. Typically when I do this, I'm going to use a lug nut, and I want to put it on to try to hold the rotor in place. Let's continue on to the caliper. We'll be sliding that right on over the rotor. We'll get this in place. Start in each of your mounting bolts. Snug them up, torque them to 130 foot-pounds. Now we can reattach our outer tie rod end to the knuckle. Just swing this right up into the proper position. Start on the mounting nut, snug it up, and then we'll torque it to 80 foot-pounds. Let's make our way over and resecure our ABS wire along the flex hose. We'll just take this and press it into the plastic brackets. We've got this area that goes into the flex hose. We'll make sure that that's secured as well. Press right in there. Now we can get this lug nut off of here. We're going to continue on by putting on the wheel. We'll start on all of the lug nuts and snug them up. We'll get the wheel back on the ground, and we can continue on with the axle nut and torque everything as needed. With the wheel safely on the ground, we'll continue on torquing these in a crisscross manner to 135 foot-pounds. We can continue on with our axle washer and the axle nut. We'll bottom this out and then torque that to 180 foot-pounds. When you're tightening this, it's a good idea to make sure that you never use an air tool because you don't want to damage the bearing. Now we can torque this to 180 foot-pounds. Torqued. Now that we have that torqued to 180 foot-pounds, we'll continue on with a brand new locking cotter pin. Slide that right on through the slot here. We'll pin it over. Continue on to your center cover. Looking along the back, you'll find that you have 4 of these ports that will fit right over your lug nuts. Okay friends, we've got the truck back together. At this point, you can go ahead and take it for a road test down to your local alignment shop. Thanks for watching.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.